Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate Podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, and mangas. I'm your host, the soon-to-be-known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my Invincible co-host is Jamie.
What's good, my G?
I was struggling. Well, I didn't bother to look up an adjective for you this time, so...
So you borrowed one from the title.
I mean, it's a tie-in kind
Poor
of thing, isn't
workmanship, sloppy workmanship, 0 out of 5 stars, literally unusable.
Yeah, but in terms of SEO, it's
it's perfect.
it's prime.
It's exactly what we needed.
And also, we don't know if you're not invincible. You're not invulnerable. I think that's the difference, because invulnerable is like you can't be hurt in any way.
If you'd have asked me this question in my early 20s, I would have agreed with you that the jury was still out on it. Now,
I'm going to live forever.
As a 31-year-old man who is audibly recovering from a minor cold that has taken me a week to get over, I can quite safely say I'm probably not invincible.
Yeah, but like my dad used to say when he took us on the motorway for holidays, did you die?
Well, not yet, no. But...
Then you might be invincible. We might all be invincible. That's the point. And it's kind of the theme of this week's comic that we'll be getting into.
I mean, not really.
It's kind of also just a name. It's a bit of a name. But yes, we are doing one that I've been looking forward to for a while, to the point where I think when we were first conceiving of this whole project.
Don't call it that.
When we mutually conceived, when we birthed this podcast.
I don't even remember the conversation that led to this podcast now.
I just kidnapped you at one point, and then you woke up in the chair with the microphone in front of you.
In my own home. You kidnapped me and took me home.
And I did the first intro, and you were just, when you're kind of groggy waking up from chloroform, where you're kind of like, and you just go along with whatever's happening.
Ryan, I don't know that. I've not had that experience. Never been chloroformed, except for apparently that one time.
No, so you don't know you've had that experience. That's the clever part.
It's the joy of chloroform.
I just started the first intro, and you went, "Oh yeah, I'm glad to be here."
Yeah, really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And if you're listening at home and you ever want to start a podcast, just kidnap a random member of the public.
Don't do that. That's terrible advice.
Legally, we have to say don't do that.
No, morally and ethically, we have to say don't do that.
Morally and ethically, for the sponsors, we have to say don't do that.
But if you are going to kidnap somebody, make sure it's your most interesting friend.
Yeah, I mean, if you can. Or the one who's least likely to report you to the police.
Oh, that was me, wasn't it?
You had nothing else going on at the time. All right, good bit of banter.
A little bit of banter to get us going.
And like I said, it was a title that I was already thinking of when we first started this, because this is one of my favorite comics of all time.
I think we're coming up to our first full year of doing this.
This is the 40th episode? No, it's not. It's 41st. Don't ask me to count things.
Yeah, but we've not actually managed. No, we have. We've not missed a week, have we, since we started? But we didn't start uploading for about 2 months before.
Yeah, we wanted to just bank them first and then worry about the technical stuff later.
Well, I mean, I think we were still making decisions about whether or not it was interesting enough to show other people, weren't we?
Let's record several hours worth of episodes and then we'll commit to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I reckon we've been doing this for about 48 weeks now. So we are literally...
coming up to a year, if not
already
already
past it. It was at some
it.
point last November that we started doing this.
I mean, I guess we started releasing, February? I mean, I'd have to check the stats, but, we released around that time.
I think it might... Yeah, I don't remember anymore.
Well, as I said, one of my favorite comics of all time, so I'm excited.
Back to the comic.
It's back to comic before we got to the comic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's one of my favorites. I'm eager to get your opinion on it.
Okay.
But little bit. The preamble up top is Invincible, the 2003 ongoing... Sorry, no longer ongoing, but it was ongoing for quite a few years. 10 plus years at the very least. A significant impact on the superhero genre, I believe.
Really?
Yep, and for being one that was outside of the big two. So this was one of the ones that not revitalized Image, the publisher, because Image had some good stuff going on beforehand, but this, as we'll get into another title written by the same author, kind of at the same time got people like, oh, this is one of the best publishers now.
Are we being coy about who wrote this?
Oh, well, I'm about to get into it.
It was written by Robert Kirkman, all right? The bloke who did The Walking Dead.
Who I've got to say, I think at this point, I have to put up there as one of my favourite writers. Invincible, Walking Dead, obviously. I also liked another one he did called Outcast, which was like a thing about possession and making that like a action thriller kind of thing.
Am I right in saying he wrote a few storylines for Saga as well?
I think him and Brian K. Vaughan, because they're both Image, I think they like swapped or something. So I think Brian K. Vaughan took over whatever he was doing at the time, which might have been this, might have been Walking Dead, might have been...
But they guested on each other's stuff a little bit, didn't they? Again, if somebody actually knows, comicliterate@gmail.com.
I'll do a bit of Googling while we're getting into stuff. If you can talk for an extended time, I'll do some secret Googling.
Do you know what, Ryan? I might be able to talk for an extended time.
Play into your wheelhouse here. But it's written by Robert Kirkman, who actually went on to become the editor-in-chief of Image Comics.
Yeah, he really did work up the ranks there, didn't he?
I think they were just like, you are one of our most famous writers.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
We need an editor-in-chief. Do you want to do it? And he was like, it's literally my dream.
Yeah, so nothing negative. Like, he wrote a couple good... Well, he wrote one very, very good comic book.
I'd say 2. I would put it at 2. Well, you haven't got into it yet. Like... So we are only covering the first 2 volumes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the places to start is that this is, to describe it to you who's not read this before, the point we're at now, there's significant things happening, but this is still very much in the Shire of the entire Invincible.
Right, okay.
Like, we've not started at all.
I love that Lord of the Rings has become so entrenched in our national consciousness.
I think it's the go-to, like, big epic story, like a sprawling story.
Did you know he was trying to create a new mythology for the British?
I mean, he kind of did.
Well, he kind of did, yeah. He was kind of successful, but that was what he was trying to do with it. He was trying to create a new mythology for us. And it's so interesting that, like, for you to say, oh, we're still in the Shire, I know exactly what that means without you having to reference anything else about Lord of the Rings.
I mean, you especially do. I think it's,
maybe, yeah.
It's impressive that a lot of other people who may not be as in the weeds with, like, literature and nerd culture, they would also understand that. So it's significant in that way. But yeah, written by Robert Kirkman and illustrated by, I've got down here the 2 names, did half and half of the volumes we did. So we had Cory Walker, who did the first volume, childhood friend of Robert Kirkman's.
Right, okay.
And then we've got Ryan Ottley, who is was a staff writer, I think, who got brought in for this.
Cool.
But what's interesting is, you noted very first, like, I suppose the first place to get into it is the art. The first thing we see.
Not much like the art.
So the reason that's interesting is, and I as a massive fan, as this is one of my favorites, the art is probably one of the least important parts of it. So I'm not like defending the art. Like I think it does the job. For me, it's the writing was the prime thing.
So it didn't have any of that Romita Jr. jank.
I think it if it did, or if anyone thinks it did, it's a consistent style. Like,
yes.
This is how
yeah. No, there was nothing like inherently. I'm really sorry. I'm recovering from a cold. So if I just sound a little bit husky in this episode, just, dear listener, know that I'm doing it just for you.
And if I sound husky, it's because that's how I sound all the time.
There was nothing like inherently janky about it. It was just uninspiring. Like there was nothing in the color palettes that they were using that really grabbed me. There was nothing in any of the character models that I thought was particularly unique or interesting. It really screamed to me that this was Robert Kirkman's opportunity to write a superhero comic.
Yep.
And he was trying to make it look like a DC comic. It looks like a DC comic to me. And you know how I feel about DC's art house style. Like, I don't like it.
I would say as someone who's a bit more used to and well acquainted with those art styles, I would disagree on that, but I can see why you would think that, if that makes sense. Like, I think
you don't agree.
Only because I think I've read so much DC and Marvel and this. Like, this is I need to find out like how long this actually ran.
It's 144 issues.
Yeah, 2003 to 2018, so literally 15
years, yeah.
So I had a big experience of this art style. So for me, it feels like a separate to Marvel and DC because I'm so entrenched in
and
it.
I suppose we have to tackle the art twice because there's 2 distinct artists.
Yes.
And before I realised that there were 2 artists, I was on about issue 5 and went, oh, this looks a bit crisper.
Yes.
And so I think the second artist who drew it,
I think he adopted the style, essentially.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But again, I don't want to say better because there was nothing wrong with it. Like, it didn't scream out as bad art. It was just uninspiring. And I think because we've read so many great indie titles, particularly the past month doing the horror stuff, where
no more spooky season anymore.
No more spooky
Can't do the
season.
voice because we're out of it now. That's illegal. It's like when people
we're firmly into November.
When people bring out the Christmas stuff before Halloween, it's like, hold on, like give it a week. Come on.
So yeah, there was nothing like inherently bad about it. It was just uninspired.
So there might be an explanation for that, and I'll see what you think. I'll tell you the rough story. I watched a YouTube video about this from a person I recommended to you. Does like kind of long form videos about comic books, which naturally found its way into my
that makes
recommended.
Sense.
But does great stuff. I think his name's Matt. I think it's literally just like Matt. I will bring it up just to
Hi,
confirm.
Matt.
But
thank you.
Basically, he did this video which kind of showed me what it was about.
Ryan's just managing his social life during podcast time here. So I'm just going to fill some dead air so that he can't edit this out, just so you, the listener, can learn how unprofessional he is. I'm so...
Just edit it out anyway.
No, you don't get to do this to me. Not when I'm having fun. Not when I'm addressing the listeners directly. Because I'm so professional, Ryan, that I don't even know where my phone is right now.
That's very good, Professor. So there's a YouTuber whose name is Matt with 4 T's.
Yeah.
So it's just, but he does really good in-depth comic book, long-form comic
so is it
videos.
Matt that is written with 4 T's, or is his name Matt with 4 T's? Because Matt with 4 T's is great.
Just literally written Matt with 4 T's.
Matt.
But it's a lowercase m. Like, he's not put any capitals in there. So that's, like, interesting for YouTube.
I don't know if you can feel that through the podcast, guys, but I'm squirming.
So him intentionally misspelling his name, that's fine. But the lack of a capital letter, that's where you draw the line?
Yeah, I'm a fucking grammarian. You know these things about me, Ryan. Why'd you do this every week?
That was unintentional.
Jamie.
But I enjoyed it anyway. But I enjoyed it. He wrote a video, and it was called "How Did a Broke Comic Book Shop Clerk Build a $1 billion comic book empire?" Basically, Robert Kirkman started this with his childhood friend. They were both big comic fans. Kirkman can't draw for shit, so he's I'll do the writing then, and his friend could actually draw. So they were drawing these comics, trying to get them to Image, and they were, I think, picked up a bit. They doing a title for a short time. I can't remember the name of it, but they did a short time. Then they did Invincible. They were like, this is our superhero one. And the problem was the artist, the original artist, who I'll go back on,
Cory
Walker. Basically what happened is, and I think this is both sides kind of version of events, was he couldn't quite handle the sudden demand for a monthly comic. Like a one person doing a comic by yourself.
A lot of artwork.
Exactly. So that might be why the simplistic nature of the art was him just kind of trying to
to get it out.
Let me just try and do something that I can do once a month.
And again, I reiterate, everything looks fine. Like, there was one point where I was reading it and I went, he's not even shaded this. And then I looked down at the next panel, and the panel that hadn't been shaded was like a landscape of the school. And then I went, he probably hasn't shaded it because it's in full light and it would be a lot of effort to work out where the light source was, blah, blah, blah. And then I kind of looked at the next panel that was set inside, and he had picked, do you know what I mean when I say picked a light source?
Like from where the shadows, or the direction the shadows go.
Yeah, like decided where his light was coming from. Like basic bread and butter artist stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, again, like, this isn't like the ones or Romita Jr.'s Spider-Man run where the art was so egregious it took me out of things. I just found it a little one-size-fits-all, a little bit plain, a little bit passé maybe. And I kind of felt as though if this had a really defined, strong, unique art style, it would have been a much more effective text overall. It would have really cemented it as kind of Kirkman's examination of superhero stories and the way they work, in the same way that The Walking Dead, I think, benefits from having a really defined, strong art style. Like, the black and white thing serves it so well, and it looks so good on the page.
Yeah. They re-released it in color recently.
I know, they always fucking do, don't they? And do you know what? Doesn't look very good. I'm sorry.
It doesn't look as good. Like,
I don't think. Yeah, I mean, they probably got a really great colorist in on it.
Yeah, but it's meant to look like the original Night of the Living Dead in black and white. Like that, it harkens back to that, to the first of the genre. So.
Yeah, The Walking Dead looked great. And again, to say that, one thing that Robert Kirkman did has a really great art style and this doesn't, the common factor there is the writer, not the artist. And so I don't think it's a fair comparison.
Yeah.
But I think that this would have benefited from a slightly more striking art style.
It's also possible that for the time, this could have been that striking art style, or at least it could have been like better by comparison to what was happening at the time. So 2003. Like,
we've read some stuff from the early noughties here
I think,
for this podcast.
Yeah, I think the biggest one was probably when the first episode, Why the Last Man, because that started like
which looks great. Which looks great.
Yeah, but again, I think the biggest thing is probably the artist's situation at the time and not being able to continue with it.
And again, I suppose this is kind of one of those instances where the context helps, but I am reading a text.
Yeah.
I'm not buying into a story, I'm reading a text. And so the fact that the art wasn't as strong, I definitely feel it detracts.
Yeah. It's possible that part of it could have been they were trying to just appeal like this
to that audience.
Yeah, like this is your standard cool superhero story, but Kirkman knew I'm doing some interesting stuff after. Yeah. And it's not till 7 issues that he really kind of starts breaking the mold and doing, surprising the audience.
Yes.
So I think part of it, this is pure speculation on my part, that he might have started to be like, let's make the audience think it's a standard fun superhero comic, and let's get that standard art style, but then we'll draw them in with the story.
And I do definitely have a sense that everything I read of this, up until the one moment that we're going to talk about a lot, I imagine, happens. I am reading I'm basically seeing the establishing shots in a movie. We're in the Shire. I think the way you described it was really apt.
Yeah.
It was laid out well though. It looked good. Just what the art was lacking, I think the way that art was laid out made up for to a certain degree. Like, it scans really well.
Paced, I think, especially well.
Yeah, no, it is paced quite well, isn't it?
Did you get to the part with the joke about the reused panels?
No.
I can't remember. I think it might be just I read a little bit after you did. And there's a part where Mark, the main character, is speaking to his favorite comic book artist. So it's very there's a running theme that Mark is a comic book fan.
Yeah. He's sat on the can reading one really early on, isn't it?
So it's pretty meta in that way. And he's talking to this comic writer or artist. I think a writer. And it might be a real writer in the world, maybe an image writer, potentially.
That would be pretty dope.
And the joke is that something they had been doing a few times in the issues leading up to is repeating panels. So the same panel again a couple of times.
Most notably when Mark's asleep and we get 2 full pages of the same panel.
Exactly.
But used to great effect. And that was actually a narrative device that I was going to come on to and talk about how much I liked that. I thought that was really clever.
Well, what's especially good is they kind of hang a lantern on it in a funny way.
Yeah, that's cool.
What happens is Mark literally says to the guy, don't you think it's a bit lazy reusing the same... No, he says something like, oh, I like how you reuse the same panels. And the writer goes... oh yeah, that's kind of like a cost-cutting thing. Like it's quicker and easier just to repeat the same panel a few times for a page. And Mark goes, well, won't people notice that you're doing it too much? And he literally does 3 panels of Mark asking that to sides, and then the writer 3 panels just staring at him, just goes, nah. So it's a good joke.
That's really funny. And Robert Kirkman is quite funny.
Yes, I mean it's not like laugh out loud funny, but it is it makes me feel like the characters are real. They joke with each other and stuff.
It's quietly funny.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
I think there's 2 really fun reoccurring jokes that I enjoyed. One of them is Mark and the other super. Everyone thinks that they're dating.
Yeah,
and that keeps coming up in progressively more embarrassing ways for them. And so everybody keeps telling Mark, oh, she's dating somebody else, and he goes, I know, I'm not. That's not why I'm interested. And then everyone at school starts to think they're dating.
Because especially back in 2003 and even still to a bit today, a man and a woman, a straight man and woman cannot platonically be friends without everyone assuming there's something going on.
Do you know who Miyazaki is?
Yes. No, I know a Miyazaki is probably a different one.
The Studio Ghibli guy.
Oh, yeah, it might be the same.
Yeah, Studio Ghibli guy.
Yeah.
He did a whole thing where he said that just because a man and a woman appear in a text together, it doesn't mean they have to be romantically involved. And you'll notice that a lot of the times when he introduces a strong male and female protagonist, they're not.
Yeah.
And it's a really big thing of his that he actually really loves exploring platonic relationships between people of opposite genders. Not that the idea of opposite gender really functionally exists anymore. Well, it does, but just in the minds of bigots.
And a social construct.
Yeah. But, so yeah, I found the exploration of that, the quiet exploration of that idea to be quite fun, particularly for 2003.
Yeah. Before we move on from that, what I thought you might find interesting. Apparently, a lot of Gen Z content consumers, for lack of a better term, but film and TV mainly, this in reference to, they're not as much of a fan of like gratuitous sex scenes.
Yeah.
And originally, I think that was coming back from like, it got to a point where at one point sex scenes were important in film and TV because that was the main place that you were going to get them from.
Yes.
Now with the internet and online pornography and everything, now it's people look at it as like, well, I don't need this anymore. So it feels weird when it's gratuitously put in for no reason.
That makes sense. I mean, I think that's a good positive trend.
But now that's now stretching out to love interests. So like when characters are kind of forced into, or not forced into, but you know what I mean? Like when they're written into like, well, now there's something like, will they, won't they? And a lot of the Gen Z people are like, why can't they just platonically be like friends or, whatever like detective partners or whatever.
And again, that was used as a way to keep people coming back to weekly episodic TV, wasn't it?
The famous ones, obviously, like Cheers, Friends. The original one, I think, like one of the biggest original ones was Moonlighting with Bruce Willis, one of his early ones.
Even stuff from this era, like Bones had it.
Yeah.
The will they, won't they thing. How I Met Your Mother had it about 4 times with different characters.
And that was the established plot. Like,
I mean, that was done quite knowingly.
Yeah.
And I think they were kind of subverting that trope a little bit there. But it's played out, isn't it? It's kind of hacky.
Exactly. This is why Gen Z are kind of rebelling against it.
The X-Files.
Big one, yeah.
Scully and Mulder. I mean, in fairness,
most people say Mulder and Scully. It's fascinating that you did not go that
route. Which one's Scully and which one's Mulder?
I think Mulder is David Duchovny, and I think Scully is
Gillian Anderson.
Who both are mate, both
which is why I went for Scully first, because Gillian Anderson goated.
Yes,
Gillian Anderson is the G. She is a fucking legend. I will not have a bad word spoken about her in my presence.
She's great in Sex Education.
She's
on Netflix.
Fucking amazing in Sex Education. Tell you what she's really good in, and it made me have some really complicated feelings.
Hannibal as well, but...
The Crown?
Oh, I haven't seen that. But...
Well, so she plays Margaret Thatcher, right? And like, on the one hand, I'm looking at Gillian Anderson, who is a... If you're listening and you don't know who Gillian Anderson is, she's a British actor. She is a profoundly beautiful woman.
Great American accent.
Just all accent work. Like her accent work in general is fucking phenomenal. And so I'm watching this incredibly detailed, really nailed on portrayal of Margaret Thatcher. But I'm also looking at Gillian Anderson, and it's like, this is something I love and something I hate at the same time, and I don't know how to feel.
It's the mark of a good actor.
It really is. Like, she fucking transcended herself in that role to play the most awful human being. Did you notice they used there's a character in this called Thatcher?
I didn't know, but go on.
There's a character in this called Mrs. Thatcher, and it really took me out of it for a moment. And then I had to remember, this wasn't written by a British person. Because if you're a British person now, you probably wouldn't call a character Mrs. Thatcher because of all of the connotations that are associated with that in British culture. But obviously, because this was written by a couple of Americans, like, that's just a name to them, isn't it?
Plus, as British people, we can't say the name Thatcher without spitting, so...
Oh, yeah, or violently shitting ourselves, depending on which part of the country you're from.
Exactly.
In the south, we spit. Up north, it's much more...
I was about to say, and if you're listening right now, guess which one we're done, but... Guess which way we've gone. So back to the comic.
Yeah, back to the comic. But no, so yeah, I really liked some of the storytelling devices that were happening here. I loved the relationship between his mum and dad.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, as just like an encompassing thing, Kirkman writes characters so well. Like, possibly one of the best in comics. Like, we are fans of other comic book artists who I think have different strengths in different places.
Yeah.
Like, prime example, I think Alan Moore is great at those bigger encompassing stories that span across like entire societies or that, that kind of thing. Like,
are we still doing the Alan Moore count?
I mean, we fucked it when we missed him for a week, so...
I don't think we've actually spoken about Alan Moore for a few weeks now.
Well, he's going to come in and out eventually. Kind of like a ghost, a presence, you know. He's always here to some degree.
He materializes sometimes from his Wizard's Cove.
If you talk about comics, he appears. But if you talk about Marvel or DC, he then violently shits himself.
Yeah, or if you're talking about his comics...
he violently shits himself. And then calls you a man baby for liking them. Once again, Alan, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on.
It would be, honestly, I would be honoured. I would be so honoured to speak with you.
We'd have to pack in afterwards. But yeah, so different artists have different strength. I think Kirkman's especially is interpersonal relationships between characters, and dialogue is a natural, successor of that as well.
Yeah, and I think something that he really excels at, and something that I'm actually quite excited about going on from this with Mark's dad, is that he excels at writing complex villains who aren't just good or evil. They are complex human beings who do things for human reasons. Negan being a really great example.
Yeah, I suspect that he kind of has a bit of the... So I heard this, and this is probably a common thing amongst some writers, but I heard it especially with George R.R. Martin, which is the way he writes, he says he makes the characters, and he kickstarts the situation, but then he feels compelled to write in the way that he would think the characters would act. So he can steer them, and but if he puts them in a situation, it's like, I'm not going to have them do something different to their character because it serves the story.
And it's why his characters are so strong and defined.
Yeah.
And again, that never really translated to the screen. If you want a really, really great, interesting, complex villain, like Littlefinger in the books is fascinating.
He did start out that, pre-season 6, he was, when it was directly lifted from the books, he was a very fascinating villain. But Kirkman, I think he made the point, I heard him talking about Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And spoilers for Walking Dead, it's been out for ages, blah, blah. When he chose to kill off Andrea in the comic.
Oh, God.
That was a much bigger thing than in the TV show, because in the TV show, they killed her off way earlier.
Yeah.
So in the comics, she was a much more big, established character.
She was married to Robert Kirkman. She was married to...
I was going to say, she was married to Kirkman. That's a...
No. She was married to the main dude.
Rick.
Rick.
Yeah. So... he talked about it, and he said...
Rick Grimes.
Yes.
Rick Grimes, of course
he got to a point where he felt, I need to kill her off. The story's just heading in that direction. And he didn't want to. He'd grown attached to the character.
Of course, yeah.
And he felt sad that having to... Again, even though he didn't want to do it, he was like, but it's where the story has to go.
Yeah.
So I think he's a bit like that. The characters need to go in a certain way based on who they are. Which sounds basic, but...
Well, it does sound basic, doesn't it? But it's not the way that characters always function in stories.
And especially in superhero stories.
Where people have profound plot armor. People have profound plot armor, and often I feel that superheroes aren't safe. Can we get to the twist now? Because it's so integral to what we're going to be talking about today.
I was going to say, do you think that might play into the title and the name of the main character?
Yeah.
Because he kind of does have the plot armor to a certain extent, but also if you were reading this, before, obviously we know that it's 100 and so issues. Back then, it feels like if you were reading it when it came out, they could have killed Mark off. It feels like they could have.
The name Invincible, I feel, is a little nod to... the perceived invincibility of youth. He isn't given the moniker Invincible, he chooses it, and it's because he currently feels invincible. And I think what we see in this comic is that the heroes are not invincible and they can die.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily feel that Mark has particularly strong plot armor. I mean,
it might be a pun on it, or a play on it in a way. But yeah, one thing before we get into the proper story, I was saying earlier about the artist. One thing that I think is noteworthy, at the very least, is the reason that the original artist, Cory Walker, stopped. I mean, he stopped because, as I said, he felt like he couldn't handle it. The deadline of doing a monthly comic. Fair dues. I absolutely could not.
But you can't draw.
I can't draw for shit anyway. Doing anything to a monthly, I do this just about. I've
been learning to draw.
That might come in handy when we release our comic lyrics tie-in comic.
Yeah, because I have a bunch of friends who are artists. I kept hounding one of them to teach me how to draw, and he was like, "No, I'm not. I can't teach you to draw." But there's this book you should do called Fun with a Pencil by Andrew Loomis.
Right.
And it's a fucking classic. It's been around since the 50s. Everyone says if you want to learn to draw, just work through this book first. And I've been working through it, and I've been getting a little bit better.
Well,
it's amazing.
You heard it here first. The comic literate tie-in comic is coming soon.
Drawn by me, crudely.
And it's just a retelling of us doing the podcast. It's the podcast in comic book form.
Oh my God. I mean, like, so one of the things that I've gotten more interested in since we've been doing this is like graphic novels that aren't like non-fiction graphic novels. And we've done a couple that I've kind of suggested and hounded you to do, haven't I? And so, and there's a graphic biography of the bloke who invented Pokemon.
Right.
That was published as a manga in Japan, never had a really good translation into English, which is why we haven't read it, because I can't find a good translation. But I think it's really cool when people use that medium to do something other than just tell a story, or to, you know, when they use it to do something other than telling a fictional story. Because we see it in film all the time, and we've had biographies and autobiographies and biopics for years and years and years. But the idea of like a graphic biography is still a bit unusual, and you don't see that many of them. And I just think it's a really fascinating concept.
Well, now you've set the bar. We have to do something interesting and never done before for our comic.
Fuck.
But
I was just going to do more Batman.
Yes. Completely unlicensed. And then when they ask, you can't do Batman, it's like, no, we're not doing Batman.
We're doing Batman.
Yeah.
He's Mr. Batman.
He's not a superhero.
He's Mr. Batman.
It's just a surname. He gets annoyed at Batman references constantly.
He exists in a universe where Batman exists.
Yeah, the comic does. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he exists in a universe where comic book Batman is a franchise.
But if we could get licensed by DC, it'd be a Batman comic where Batman's an actual superhero, but our character is just a member of the public who keeps getting people like, is your surname? I was like, I had the surname before he became the superhero.
It's actually pronounced Bateman.
It's Patrick Bateman, and it's also a American Psycho spin-off as well.
Oh, mate, we're done. Done.
That's the twist.
Right, let's stop recording.
That's the M. Night Shyamalan twist. But your writer's like, turns out it's Patrick Bateman. So, I mean, speaking on this, one thing I was almost caught myself saying is we could become like the Kirkman-Walker partnership. But the problem with that is they kind of had a bit of a falling out after Walker stopped drawing on it.
Oh,
I think they had
a shame.
It was a bit of like a rights to the comic because Walker was still technically a co-creator.
Yeah,
apparently they've all resolved it now.
Yeah.
So I think
Are they friends again?
They are working together now again. As well. They've done comics now. So.
I love a happy ending.
But there was a period of time where, and this was the video I was saying by Matt with 4 T's.
Matt with 4 T's.
That he kind of pointed out that this guy Walker was a bit like, yeah, Kirkman's a bit of an arsehole. Like, he'll just lie to you in deals and stuff. And I feel like the fact they're reconciled now, I feel like it's one of those things where he wasn't lying or anything, but I think it was like they were other sides of a business argument, and it gets a bit heated and there's, that kind of stuff. So apparently it's all fine now. So I thought worth mentioning for
contracts, man. You got to have a contract. We don't have a contract.
We don't, but we did do that blood pact, so that's probably fine.
Well, the day we summoned Mephisto to bring our dead aunt back to life.
And then he said, you have to forget you've ever done the podcast. Also, interestingly, another big tangent.
Yeah.
They're redoing the Ultimate Universe in Marvel.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the main one of that, the big Avengers type Ultimate Universe, so it's all the superheroes, but they're also doing Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So redoing that now.
So which Spidey is it going to be?
It's Peter Parker, but in the Ultimate Universe, so different universe, not 616, but the other one.
Is it Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield?
Who they use is the base for the character, who knows? But what's interesting is not only is the Ultimate Universe being helmed and written by Jonathan Hickman.
Okay,
big X-Men fame.
Yeah.
Big love for him here on the podcast.
Big name.
He also, in what seems like strong reference to the bollocks they've been doing on the Amazing Spider-Man series, which follows on from the whole Mephisto thing, and now they're still not together, and they're doing a bunch of bollocks.
Is MJ coming back?
Not only the Ultimate Spider-Man, they're married with kids.
Wait, Peter Parker finally gets to be happy.
And it's not even come out yet, but the first issue was kind of shown, and it's them as a family on the front.
Are the nerds happy?
I mean, they're like, we wanted this since fucking Mephisto, since One More Day.
Since the 80s, yeah.
They got married in the
80s. 2000s, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but they had like, issues in their marriage, but this is finally like they're actually happy with kids. And we can do this story finally.
Oh, that's
Peter's
so good.
Grown up finally. We can do this, which actually kind of comes back to this comic. I think one of the big appeals of this is we are seeing a growing character in not real time, but compared to bloody Marvel and DC in the way time stands still there, feels like a real time growth. Like,
so is Mark allowed to grow up a bit?
Yeah, we've seen him go high school to, well, not to college, but he's done the day at college, and he's going to college.
Peter Parker's been on his way to college since the mid-90s, mate. Like, well, I don't trust that.
He probably goes and he gets kicked out, and then he becomes a billionaire for a bit, and then he loses all his money, and
then they recast him.
Yeah, but Mark, they like Invincible, the universe actually goes ahead with events and stuff, and I think that's, for me, it's why it's probably my favorite superhero title ever, because it actually is a continuous narrative that has stakes, and every action and event has to be reconciled with after and stuff. So this is before we get into the stuff. If you've somehow not read Invincible, or more especially if you've not watched the TV show, then highly recommend get into it if you're, if we've interested you at all. So the big spoiler from the first 2 volumes that we read, that I said to you, read to this point we can talk about it. Do you want to talk about it? Yeah,
so there is a Justice League-style group of superheroes who all look suspiciously like the Justice League.
They're the Justice League.
There is a bloke who looks like Batman, but he just doesn't have the bat ears, and he's called Nightcrawler, and I'm going to...
It is Darkwing. Nightcrawler's X-Men.
Yeah, but Darkwing, basically, he looks cooler than Batman.
What I found especially funny with that, they show like a bit of the superheroes just doing their normal stuff before they get called. And everyone's doing the stuff like the Flash character, whatever he's called. He's on a date. He's on a date, but he's rescuing the day and coming back and stuff. You've got Wonder Woman type character who I can't remember what she was doing.
She's just hanging out with her girlfriend. Her girlfriend's making her eggs, man.
But then she gets attacked, so she has a big superhero fight. So they do all this stuff of like important stuff happening. Darkwing's apprehending some criminals in the city that's always nighttime for some reason. But they don't linger on that too much.
The moon guy blew up or something.
Yeah. So they're doing all this fun stuff. And then they get to the Aquaman guy.
Who is actually a fish.
He's a fish man, or a man fish. And he's literally just sitting there on his throne doing fuck all. And then he gets the call. He goes, oh, finally. Something to do.
So funny.
It's absolute piss take of Aquaman. I think that went away once Jason Momoa got cast. But before that, Aquaman was a laugh.
Yeah, because Jason Momoa is essentially a god. Have you heard about his, just as a tangent, as if I'm capable of anything else, when he was getting buff for Aquaman, obviously he had a super restricted diet, because they all do. And one of the things that got taken away from him was Guinness, and he had this big scene where he needed to look particularly buff, and he just wasn't getting there. And allegedly, he ran off, necked a couple pints of Guinness, and the extra iron in it just gave him what he needed. So, like, he has had his diet, his like team build calories out of his diet so that he can have a couple pints of Guinness a day, because he just loves the shit.
I'm calling bullshit on that. Not because I don't think the story exists.
Yeah.
I think, to me, that sounds like him being like, actually, it was the Guinness that helped, so if anything, I should have it more next time.
Well,
like,
and this is the thing, isn't it? But I just love the fact that of all the things that he has available to him, his tipple is Guinness. Because Guinness is fantastic. Guinness is wonderful.
I mean, they used to prescribe Guinness to pregnant women to be like, oh, the good iron or whatever.
And do you know what? The only reason they've stopped doing it is because it has alcohol in it.
It's a big reason.
Well, I know, but Guinness is really great. Oh, mate, I just want a Guinness now.
I went to the Guinness, like,
the brewery,
the brewery, and
the distillery where they distill the Guinness.
Brewery, I don't know.
It's a brewery, mate.
The factory where they where they facilitate making of the Guinness,
where they milk the leprechauns to make the black stuff,
and they have these posters from like all from the ages, like back when it first started and whatever. And one of them was the one of like recommending it to pregnant women. And I thought, oh, they're going to bang on about all the iron in it. And the advert, it was a TV advert from like the 60s or something. And it's literally a cartoon doctor being like, you should drink Guinness when you're pregnant because all of the Guinnessy goodness in the drink. And I was like, that's not science.
The Guinnessy goodness.
I bet he's not even a real doctor.
Oh, that's fucking great.
But so yeah, the Guardians of the Globe, the Justice League, they all get called.
The Guardians of the Globe all get a suspicious call. They assemble, and then somebody turns up and murders all of them.
And they set up a red herring earlier because one of them recently lost their powers, kicked out, really bitter about it, and you see him like
the guy who builds the super suits for everyone has a suit that would have restored his powers that gets suspiciously stolen.
Like an Iron Man type armor kind of thing. Yeah.
And it turns out it's Mark's dad that did the murdering. I really love the resolve as to where the suit went, and it's just the guy's butler.
Well, they like in great fashion. It was almost like an expert red herring set beforehand. Because again, if you don't know that this is what this comic is going to be like, by this point, so that's issue 7. This happens. By issue 7, it's been very run of the mill, like coming of age story, but with superheroes, and it's interesting. And they're obviously parodying some other big superhero stuff like the Justice League and everything. So you're reading it like, oh, it's a bit meta, but it's also got its own story, and the dialogue is really good, and the characters are believable. You go through all this stuff, and then when you get to this part, you go, oh shit, like this is real. Like this is where it's really starting. And to think that it happens in issue 7, so going on for 7 months.
Yeah.
So people are reading this, assuming it was a monthly release. I'm pretty sure it was, but imagine people reading this for 7 months, having all those thoughts, and then getting to this point. It's like, oh, bloody hell, it's kicked off. Like,
yeah, and it did, and it took me by surprise. I was really shocked by it. Normally, I can spot these things.
Exactly, and again, like, how good it was.
Pattern recognition, normally I can spot these things as they're happening, but there was no hint. There was no hint that this was what was going to happen. And do you know what? It was the moment at which I went, okay, this is pretty cool. Because to start with, I kind of felt it was a little bit sterile. And a bit funny and a bit jokey, and it was like, oh, this is kind of the same thing that we've seen with all the young Peter Parker stories, or more recently with the young Blue Beetle stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like a young, or even the guy from Rogue Sun, particularly with the father-son relationship stuff. Like it's
that almost feels like a continuation of the theme of Invincible,
right?
And it's also by Image.
And I believe when we talked about Rogue Sun, you mentioned Invincible. Like you mentioned Invincible to me. And so, it was definitely a turning point in the arc of the story. And it was the point at which I went, okay, shit, this is something I could read. Like, this is now really interesting. There is one scene that I'd really like to chat about, and it doesn't really have much bearing on the story, if not just to kind of give us a fun little character moment between mum and dad.
Well, can you hold that for a second? Because I think I've got a fun thing.
I'm going to shit myself.
I mean, you do that anyway. So what I've got here is, so talking about how big that scene was, it kind of almost feels like that's where the comic
You want to show me a
starts.
bit from the TV show, don't you?
I'm going to show you the scene from the TV show.
Okay.
But what they did interestingly with this is the TV show, the first episode ends with this scene.
Oh, fuck. Right, okay,
So-
that makes a lot of sense.
And I thought that's interesting because, again, like, it feels like that's when the comic almost actually starts at issue 7. But you still need to read the rest of the stuff to get the impact. But you could tell when making the TV show, they were like, oh, we need this like at the end of episode 1 to establish the stakes.
And that's interesting because The Walking Dead starts in media res. Like The Walking Dead in the first issue, everything's kicked off. He's breaking out of the hospital. There's zombies everywhere.
Yeah.
And so for this to have had that 7-issue build up, I mean, I get it. I totally get it because I was quite grounded in the universe that I was in. I kind of understood the rules of everything. I understood what everyone did. And then this happened and it's like, fuck, shit, it's getting serious now.
Yeah.
You want me to watch the thing, don't you?
I want to get your live reaction for it because it's quite
well, I'll watch the thing and then I won't react to it until we're back because we can't have the audio for this. Well, they really went there, didn't they?
They did. And I thought especially interesting because the comic book, it's very quick, like
we see
close-up
one
shots.
person die and he makes a quip.
Yeah. You see people dying and then you only reveal their timeline after everyone's dead because it's so quickly done. Whereas in this one, you could tell they were like, we need to like shock viewers with this.
Is that a kid's cartoon?
I mean, no, obviously not.
It's really brutal.
Yep. And I thought
they went there, didn't they? Fucking hell.
I thought especially interesting because, again, it's such a pivotal moment in the comic. And you can tell that they really got into the detail of like, this is how bad it is. And to the point where when the series came out, I think it was last year or the year before, but what happened was people who read the comic and knew this was coming, they filmed people they were with who hadn't read the comic seeing this for the first time.
Yeah.
So this is kind of online. This is similar to like, do you remember there was like live reactions of the Red Wedding?
Yes.
And things like, there's things like that where people are like, oh my God, Omni-Man, no. Like,
it's brutal. It's a really brutal scene.
Very brutal, yeah. And I think, again, it's interesting, the difference between the comic and the TV show, this makes a concerted effort to be like, this is the main story. Like, this is the plot that we're dealing with throughout the series, and that's why we're starting on episode 1. So, pretty brutal.
I think what's interesting is that directly after this happens in the comic, we then see him go home and just hang out with his family.
Yeah.
And he goes to the funerals, which is ice cold. He speaks at the funeral.
Well, there's also
That's ice cold.
a part that I made a note about was that there's a part where some other people are talking in the foreground.
Yeah.
And in the background, he's talking to parody Aquaman's
Wife.
widow.
Yeah.
And he's like, he said, I think I made a note.
He said it wasn't your fault, like you couldn't do anything about it kind of thing.
Yeah, sorry for your loss. You're like, you couldn't do anything about it. And you just feel like, oh.
You cold-hearted motherfucker.
Yeah. And it really sets him up as like, oh, by the way, he's the villain, essentially.
Yeah, and I kind of, everything that is going to now have to come kind of went through my head as I was reading it. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's interesting.
It also makes the strong points leading up to in the comic of how much less strong Mark is compared to his dad.
Yeah, and it's a consistent theme, isn't it?
So if you're looking at this being like, well, if Mark's the protagonist and his dad's the antagonist, then they're probably going to fight. How's that going to go? And I think that builds up even more tension than your traditional Marvel or DC, where it's like, well, they're the bad guy and it'll be a bit rough, but they'll win in the end kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, this really feels like, how could this possibly resolve itself?
Yeah, it's powerful stuff, isn't it?
So, comic again, it does this point and then it lingers so well afterwards.
Yeah.
What point did you get to in the story? What points to talk about?
The end of the funeral where the building blows up.
Right, yeah. So it gets really interesting, like the plot points from there and how things kind of happen afterwards.
Yeah.
Which again, it comes down to how well the characters are written and how they interact stuff. It doesn't feel like, ooh, there's this undercurrent now when it might, like, it kind of subverts how it all comes out as well, interestingly enough. So that's something to get to. Maybe I might have inspired you to watch the TV show, so potentially
maybe actually. How many episodes are there?
I think it's like 10, maybe.
Is it?
Amazon. So.
Of course it is.
What I like to do, what I'm doing now, is I'll just buy a month of a streaming service at a time, watch everything that's on there you want, and then cancel it, and then watch the next
You can get a week of Amazon for like £1.
Exactly. And it's I cannot imagine having all the streaming services at one go now.
Oh my God. It would be obscene, wouldn't it?
That's a sign of wealth. Like, you have to be a successful drug dealer to afford Netflix and Amazon Prime.
And Spotify.
Don't even get me started on Spotify.
Books on Spotify now.
It's interesting. They're probably challenging Audible in a way.
Yeah, they're whole ass books.
So the scene you were then going to get into, a scene between Dad and the mum, who I actually made a note of her name because I think she's going to be interesting to talk about.
Well, that's not what I was going to chat about. This seems trivial now. We've really gotten into the themes of the comic book, and I was like, there was a fun scene that it was enjoyable.
But those are a big part of it, I think.
So it was when Mark's dad sent him to go fight that extraterrestrial threat.
Alan the alien.
Yeah, and it turns out he's like, so Mark's dad has been fighting this dude every 3 years for a long time, and it turns out that he is the auditor for a group of intergalactic protectors. And he just goes and has a little fight to make sure you're doing all right. And he references that the last guy wasn't very chatty, and that's a sign that you're trying too hard and that you're not actually keeping up. And then it turns out that obviously he's not actually a threat to Earth, and he's been going to the wrong planet that just sounds a bit similar.
He was meant to be at Urath.
Yeah, he was meant to be going to Urath.
Which is also, it does play, like, it gets way more into this big space stuff as it goes on.
Yeah.
There's that trope of, like, Marvel and DC where it's like, people in space speak English somehow, and they know that Earth is called Earth for some reason. Like, like that kind of stuff where it's like, don't think about it. We're jumping some bits of information here just to streamline it a bit more. So it does all that kind of stuff.
But it's funny. It's a really funny moment, and Alan the alien's really sound. We like him. I really hope I get to meet him again.
He is a big character. So,
he's great. He's so much fun.
And in the TV show, voiced by Seth Rogen.
Oh,
it's good. It's good.
No, I fucking rate Seth Rogen. I think he's hilarious.
It's actually Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg who did Preacher and The Boys TV shows. They did this one as well.
Oh shit! It's gonna be good then.
Oh, it's already fantastic.
Because I really rate Evan Goldberg as a writer.
I mean, they're both writers, I guess, aren't they?
Well, they write together. They've been a writing partnership since they were in school.
Mm.
They wrote Superbad while they were in school about their time in high school.
Mm.
And yeah, I really rate them as a writing partnership. I think they write really funny stuff. And I think, I mean, I don't know which of them it is. It's hard to attribute with stuff like that, isn't it? But I think they make quite astute comments on things and they're quite, thoughtful.
I mean, they modernized The Boys really well because, like, when we're talking about the comic...
Yeah, people keep talking to me about The Boys.
The TV show is really good.
I hear it's excellent.
And I probably mentioned this on the episode we did of The Boys, but one of the ways they modernize is in the Boys TV show, in the comic, there's a bit of like the film stuff, but it's the comic books and merchandise, which is like the big money source for all. In the TV show, they are doing like the big MCU Marvel streamline of films, and that's the big one. Like, but the superheroes are playing themselves in the films and stuff.
Okay.
So they're good at modern, and they also update like the political stuff. Like Homelander in the Boys TV show is kind of almost like a bit of a Trump character now.
They make very astute observations, don't they? They always have done.
Yeah.
Most notably in This Is the End.
Yep.
Like that was really astute, and that was really like knowing, wasn't it?
Yes, very meta because they're all playing themselves as well.
Do you know they didn't tell the studio?
I didn't know that. I did know that my tidbit of information is Michael Cera, when he was kind of shown, he arrived quite late, to be a part of it. And they were like, here's what we want you to do. Like, essentially be a massive fucking arsehole because it's funny because he's the furthest thing from it in reality. But apparently the one caveat that he had to play was like, I want to wear my windbreaker coat that I'm wearing now. Like, I want to wear my own thing because he thought it'd be better for him to look like so like unassuming threat kind of thing. Like just him, like Michael Cera, if you just imagine him in your head, like he's wearing like a kind of weird, quirky-ish kind of rain jacket, and then he's like doing coke and telling people to fuck off and things like that.
So the studio said that they weren't allowed to play themselves and that they had to just be characters. And they told the studio that, that's fine, we'll do that. And then they turned up on set. And remember, there was a mural of Seth and what's his name?
James Franco.
Scandal noted.
There was. Thanks, P. Holmes.
They had Seth and James like in 20-foot high letters on the walls on this set, and they were like, "Do you reckon the studio's gonna know?" The last funny thing about the production of that film, Channing Tatum ends up being like Danny McBride's gimp sex slave. They almost wrote that out of the movie because they couldn't get anyone to do it, right? And what's his name? Jonah Hill, who obviously, has worked with Channing Tatum, said, I bet Channing Tatum would do it. Like, I bet he would. And Seth Rogen sent him an email at 3:00 in the morning, and then 2 minutes later got a response that said, "Yeah, I'm in." Like Channing Tatum was just like, "Yeah, fuck it, I'll do it."
And he was up at 3 in the morning.
Like Channing Tatum was awake at 3 in the morning and accepted that fucking role.
He was probably on the treadmill because he has to look like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, so that's dope. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna. I say I'm definitely gonna watch it.
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah. The next episode, you'll be like, what did you think of it?
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh, mate, I'm sorry, I was busy.
The most interesting thing is they also subvert the traditional superhero tropes in the TV show in their own ways, but a bit more like bigger, wider ways. Like, for example, the way it starts is this place with these security guards, like a science lab or something, and the security guards have like a 5-minute conversation. Right. Like, just like back and forth, chit chat like co-workers do, a bit about their life. One of them's taking their son to like a baseball game or something.
Did they die?
Well, they're doing that.
Fatal family photo, man.
And then an attack happens from supervillain. But it takes like a surprisingly long time setting up these bystanders to then have the impact of like, these supervillains are like causing collateral damage. And
do you know the fatal family photo is a trope?
Yeah, it's like, it's also he's 3 days away from retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fatal family photo, if somebody shows a photograph of their family in like a war film or something, they are dying first.
I can't remember who, I think it might have been Simpsons did a trope of it like that, where someone's in war and someone's like, I need you to get my gold watch to my family. Oh no, I think it's Futurama. So it's Bender. They're in war. It's like, I need to get my gold watch to my family. Bender's like, will do. It's like, but wait, I haven't shown you the photo. It's like, I'll find them.
Man, Matt Groening, goated.
Yeah.
Goated.
But one thing I made a note of for this I thought you'd appreciate, it's one of those things that you may or may not notice. how in depth they get into like the act of flying as a superhero.
Yes.
I thought for 2003 that must have been especially refreshing.
This is one thing that I found a little bit. This is one of the things that I found a little bit uninspiring in the first few issues, is that all of the supers seem to have the same kind of power set. They all kind of fly, they're all super strong, there's not much differentiation, particularly in the teens, in their powers. And I'm kind of like, oh, that's a shame, because the one thing that the Marvel Universe is really good at, and DC, the one thing the big two are really good at is having diversified move sets.
Well, they had to, I think over decades, they just kept having to make new ones. Like, this one now does other stuff. Like,
whereas these guys are all just kind of, they're a bit Superman.
I think,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think the point of that is, I think I've made this point quite a few times, is when titles like these, comics and any other literature, whatever, when you take a well-worn genre, you use the tropes to get things quicker,
to expedite things.
Exactly. So like Mark, he's a Superman type, his dad's a Superman type, like Atom Eve is a Green Lantern type powers, so it kind of gets quickly like that.
But again, they're all very samey, aren't they? The power sets are all a bit samey, except for the Global Guardians, whatever they're called. But again, they're direct rip-offs of specific DC characters. It's interesting that, I suppose in 2003, the Marvel Cinematic Universe hadn't kicked off.
Nowhere near, no.
And so the Avengers wasn't super popular as a Marvel franchise. Like, DC was doing a lot better than Marvel at this point, wasn't it?
I think in comics they were doing probably similar. Like, they both had like animated cartoons and stuff, which had elevated them quite a bit. Around this time, they probably had the Justice League TV show, which was big. And
which is why he went with the Justice League, not the Avengers.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of more, I think they're more like archetype superpowers. Like,
I suppose they kind of are, aren't they? Like, the Avengers are a bit of a funny mixed bag, really, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the Avengers at the time, that was literally the superheroes. They weren't doing anything else.
They were the rejects, weren't they? Because they had the band, which they had another ensemble, didn't they, Marvel?
Well, they had a few. Fantastic Four, X-Men, a bunch of other handful ones.
And so the Avengers were kind of the mishmash ensemble cast.
Yeah, like, we are literally not doing anything with these characters.
Yeah, and so it's sort of interesting that the Justice League probably at the time was a more logical place for him to parody, wasn't it?
And so much so that when it came time to the MCU, creating and starting the MCU, they used those same superheroes because those are the ones they still had the rights to because no one else wanted them.
No one else had bought them 20 films of them in the noughties. Yeah.
Spider-Man, the Hulk, X-Men, like Fantastic Four, all the more popular ones had gone. So they were like, well, we've got these, but we can make the Avengers.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because the Avengers are now the gold standard for a superhero ensemble, aren't they?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Really? Like, that's what everyone's trying to emulate.
I mean, the film style, I mean, not necessarily film style, the franchise style especially. Like, the great quote is like when DC were trying to get Justice League off the ground, they did Superman, they did Batman v Superman, and they did Justice League. And someone put it really well. They said, all the studios want an Avengers, but none of them want to make Iron Man. And that is the thing. Like, they just wanted to get straight into the big ensemble.
Yeah, and Iron Man, like, I still really rate the Iron Man films. Out of everything, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the MCU in general, am I?
Yeah.
But I do like the Iron Man films. Particularly the first one. I think the first one's really strong.
I mean, the casting of Downey Jr. was like the thing I think that made it.
But it's so interesting because Robert Downey Jr. had a really, really rough time of it in the noughties. He wasn't this big global megastar.
But he was so... obviously, they wanted someone bigger. I think it was... who's the guy? He was the director of the first one, played Happy Hogan in Chef.
Yeah.
Jon Favreau. Favreau.
Yeah.
I think he was the one who was like, he got the director role and he was like, it needs to be Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
Like, he embodies the character already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, he was totally the right fit. But I mean, at the time, Robert Downey Jr. was a bit of a rogue choice for anything. Like, he was not the guy that you would build a franchise like that around 15 years ago. He had, he'd just been in prison.
Now. I don't think they wouldn't choose him now because it's too successful to fail, like to risk failure.
Yeah, absolutely. They'd go for a much more conventional, safe leading man.
And Disney, who owns it now, as a rule, do not hire people with a criminal record. So when it was Marvel, they were fine getting Robert Downey Jr. But when Disney took over, it's like, we can't do this again because as a rule, the only two people who've been in Disney properties with criminal records I've heard this somewhere. This might be wrong. I think it's Robert Downey Jr. and Tim Allen in the Toy Story films because Pixar got bought by Disney.
Tim Allen done.
Tim Allen was Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story.
No, what did he do wrong?
He was trafficking cocaine.
To infinity and beyond.
He literally got caught trafficking cocaine.
Hey, spaceman.
And there's a mugshot of him when he got caught and arrested for it. And in the mugshot, he has a little Narcos mustache.
Oh, that's so good. How did I not? This is the stuff you miss when you don't follow the news at all.
I mean, this wasn't in the news. This was decades ago. I got it from being in this, deep culture stuff.
So good. What? Just as a tangent, by the way, I've had some feedback on the podcast that I just wanted to shoehorn into the episode.
Sure.
An old friend of mine has been listening and he's been really enjoying it. The people want more tangents, Ryan. That's what the people are here for. I've got it on good authority from an actual listener that they want more tangents. But also, and I think you'll get a chuckle out of this, showed it to his partner and they listened. They're a Cambridge-educated doctor. So amongst our listenership is a Cambridge-educated doctor. So I really feel like we need to up our game a bit.
So here's the problem with that. I don't think we can physically fit any more tangents in though we just before we stop talking about the comic. You know what that is? And this has come up again recently. The thing on my phone that tells me that I've used my phone more last week than usual, it's back and it's still bewildering. So I'm like, how could I possibly be using my phone any more than I already am? Every week. And again, Monday morning, it goes, you used your phone 3 hours more than usual. I'm like, how?
Which 3 hours?
How is that? I don't have any more time in the day. I'm already addicted.
Are you scrolling Reddit in your sleep, bruv? Is that what's happening?
I must have started, but... But even then, if it's a couple of hours every week, what's that, 8 hours?
Yeah, that's a full work day every week that you're losing somewhere.
It can't still be telling me that I'm using my phone more than usual. And this is what I mean. It's we can't possibly fit in more tangents than we already do.
Isn't this a deep cut from the start of the podcast?
It is. And it's going to...
I remember talking about this.
Every time my phone reminds me, it's going to come up again.
Oh, I love it.
And back to you, Rachel. Just so you see, here's the mugshot.
Oh, mate, that's fabulous. He looks great. I mean, he is cocaine skinny. He is that is a skinnier Tim Allen than I'm accustomed to. He
literally looks like the white guy who's been hired by the cartel in Narcos.
Doesn't he? Oh, yeah, that's so good.
But yeah, so he's the only other one with a criminal record. I thought criminal record literally means have you been arrested and have a mugshot? So the only two people in Disney properties who have mugshots are Robert Downey Jr. and Tim Allen. So learn something new on the podcast every week.
I'm trying to think now if there's anyone in Disney that I'm surprised hasn't been arrested.
I mean, that's a dangerous hill to start going down.
Yeah, maybe that's
a true crime podcast.
What was Dwayne The Rock Johnson been up to? Because it's not geology, Ryan.
I mean, as we've established in a short that was well received, surprisingly.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah. That was a good one.
The Rock as a geologist. What did you think of, did you pick up on the running joke? And it might not be running for how much we read it, but it was established that the Viltrumites, who are basically the Kryptonians of this,
yes,
they all have mustaches.
Yes. Yes, I did clock it. And they did a really good job in making Mark's dad look as much like Tom Selleck as is humanly possible.
I mean, and they all, once you see the flashbacks, they all
look like Tom Selleck, don't they? It's great.
I'll give you a little bit of a very minor spoiler for the entire series. It's never addressed. No one ever points out.
Does Mark start rocking a stash as he gets older?
I won't say either way or not on that.
Oh, no, I need to know.
I don't think he does. I'm almost certain he doesn't.
You know I'm a purveyor of facial hair.
But I think that becomes a kind of running theme of him not taking on...
His dad's mantle.
His dad's mantle, yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I interrupted your thought by coughing and then finished it. Would you like to redress that?
I can't even remember it now. I'll edit out the cough, but I'll leave in that part there.
I'm so sorry.
People will know, people are like, that sounded a bit weird. Oh, he coughed. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I have a cold.
I mean, it's been going around. We've delayed some recordings because...
We are a week late.
We'll catch up. We're professionals. We'll hammer down.
Well, you're not professional. Apparently, you're using your phone 3 hours a day more while you're meant to be podcasting.
I mean, I'm using it right now, so maybe that's where the extra hours are coming in. But even then, that's finite. It still doesn't make sense. What do you think of the cliffhanger with the chest bomb at the beginning? Because I thought
really cool.
I thought that started off very typical, very kind of like we're in the action and then like pause, freeze frame. This is me. You might be wondering how I got, that kind of trope.
I mean, I thought it was a bit weak, I'll be honest with you.
And that's what I mean. But what's interesting is they don't address it till issue 4.
Yeah.
So normally with these kind of things, like from what I've seen and experienced, they normally address that end of issue 1.
Yeah.
So they have to pay off immediately. Like, we're back in a circle now. Whereas in this, it was actually the volume kind of bookended. And then it turns out at the end, it explains the significance of it. Like, it's not just like a bank robber who had a bomb on his chest or whatever. And you don't even know it's a bomb at the beginning, or he does explode, I guess. Yeah. Maybe you infer it. But then when you get to the point of like this high school teacher who was...
his son died.
He was mad at students, but they weren't even the ones who bullied him.
It wasn't a great storyline.
But I feel like, for me, knowing what this kind of comic book is, for me, it felt a bit more refreshing because it was a bit underplayed. Whereas traditionally, it would be like, the big bad at the end of the first volume, you've caught me and now we're going to fight. Whereas this just felt like depressing almost.
It was, but that was the first point at which I sort of thought, what has Ryan got me reading here? Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't rate it as a storyline. Really, it hotted up for me towards the end of issue 7.
Yeah.
When I realised what the actual overarching theme of the whole thing was going to be, I was like, right, now I'm in, now I'm hooked.
And maybe, potentially, because of how underplayed the first 6 issues are, that actually helps the shock of this issue 7 reveal.
And the reveal was slight. It was a single panel, end of the issue, dropped into issue 8. Like, it was good. It was well done. It was well executed. It was well written.
Yeah.
And again, the art had picked. I mean, knowing the story of why the art looked the way it did, I'm really reluctant to harp on about the fact that it did get a bit better with the new artist. It was a bit more interesting to look at. The layouts were better. Just the backgrounds looked better and stuff.
I think, and this is again recalling memory from however long ago when I read it.
Yeah.
I think that it actually gets better as it goes along. And I think the artist who came in, Ryan Ottley, I think he slowly transitions to make it better and more his style. Yeah. And again, the style remains. But again, I think, like you pointed out, I think he makes it crisper as it goes along.
It's just a bit crispier.
But also, for a comic that ran 15 years... it might have been just the printing technology developed over that time as well.
There's so many things that we could attribute it to, aren't there?
Yeah.
Like,
but I'm pretty sure it gets better. So if anyone who's considering reading it, you've got that. One thing I was going to point on, I thought you might find interesting, is the mother character, Debbie.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, great mother character. But then very well written, like the fact that she's not in any of the action, but you see her reacting to like the dad's absences and then the son suddenly now getting these absences.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's trying to hold in the fear and the sadness. And
doing a great job. Like, I love that scene where Mark has been doing some really dark stuff and dad has been allegedly taken hostage and made prisoner by this alien race. And in the week that he's been gone has actually been like a year for him and he looks really bedraggled. And she asks them what their day have been like, and they tell her these really quite harrowing stories, and she goes, anyone for dessert? Like, she's just totally nonplussed by it all, and it's really fun.
So I was going to make a point of great mother character.
Yeah.
And then I kind of realized, I think there's been a couple of comics where we've isolated great mother characters.
That's interesting, yes. And I agree.
And to extend even further, the I can't remember her name, but from League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Harkness, was it? She was not mother, but she was like the responsible one of the group, kind of thing.
And we like the mum in Rogue Son.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like what we're kind of identifying here is that the limitation of female roles within comic books and superhero stories, especially for 2003. I think it's obviously a lot better now, but I think back then we'd be like, oh, this great mother character. But then it becomes like, well, who else was the female character going to be? Like, it was either the mum or the love interest.
Yeah, and they gave us both. Of the limited roles that women were allowed at the time.
And that's what I mean. So that's why I kind of caught myself, rather than being like, oh, it's a great mother character. It's like, well, that's the one well-written female character, and it was going to be one or the other.
One of two well-written female characters. I like the other super.
Yeah.
She's fun.
Eve is a great character. She actually might be my favorite female superhero.
Oh, cool. I like her.
There's a great thing they did with the TV show in preparation for season 2, they actually did a one-off special, and it was Eve's origin, and they never.
Cool.
I think they broached on it, but they never fully show it in the comic.
So it's all OC.
I think so, and I think Kirkman even either wrote it or he helped on it or some stuff.
That's cool.
But it's great. It's harrowing and it's really emotional. And I think you'd love it. It's a great story, great action sequences as well. So it has everything.
Did you clock the one of the times that 2003 really crept into the story?
I mean, probably a bunch of times, but what are you talking about?
So his friend asked him to take him for a little fly, and there's a panel where he's got him in his arms.
I made a note of it, yeah.
And Mark says, "This is so gay."
Yes.
And I read that and went, "Oh, for fuck's sake."
Thing is, on the one hand...
It annoyed me, Ryan.
Yeah, I think we've had this discussion before, and I think it's as applicable here as it is in others. On the one hand, it's not aged well at all. But on the other hand, I do feel like it's accurate for how kids that age talked at that time.
Yeah, it's what a teenager would have said in 2003.
Mm.
But... we're not reading it in 2003, and we have to read the text, and it's 20 years old, and it hasn't aged well. But I just read it and went, ugh.
It's toxic. It's toxic masculinity, and it's
homophobia.
And it's
deeply rooted homophobia,
and it's using homophobia to demonize vulnerability between men, essentially.
Yeah, and I just read it and went, oh, Robert, you're better than that.
But again,
clearly he isn't though. Clearly he's not better than that. Well, clearly he wasn't. And I think the problem is he was capturing the speech patterns of an American teenager in 2003, and that's probably what they would have said. But he was a grown-ass adult who knew what he was doing at the time.
But he was also a teenager in I assume, the late 90s. Well, I'm assuming he was a teenager at some point well before 2003. Then. So I think growing up with that and growing up in that era and being subject to all that, I think if this is the only reference to it, it's better than a lot of others that came out in that time.
And again, we really got into it with the very deeply rooted homophobia in The Boys.
Yes.
And I think that was a more egregious example because there was this sort of defined and insidious homophobia there, where there were actual gay characters that were portrayed as being less than because they were gay. But still shit.
Yes.
Still shit.
And with The Boys as well.
Call it as you see it, it's still shit.
With The Boys as well, they were all terrible characters. So maybe it hits different that Mark is the nice protagonist and he's using that language.
Yeah, absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely. And it didn't need to be there. He could have said, this is so lame, and it would have had the same effect. It just didn't need to be there.
The main point that to take away from this podcast is it's not gay to carry the homies while flying.
No, and you know what? Even if it is gay, that's good. Even if there are some homosexual undertones to you carrying the homie while you're flying and you have a little smooch afterwards, that's fucking A triple plus golden. That's good stuff.
There are some great jokes, I think.
I had my thumb up. For the listener, I had my thumb up for the duration of that entire utterance.
Okay. Has led to some great jokes from Robot Chicken, because they do a lot of superhero stuff, and how Batman's the only one who can't fly of the Justice League. So he's like, I could carry you, and Batman's like, I won't be carried. And that kind of plays more to just general vulnerability. Yes. Batman wouldn't be carried. But then what happens is Green Lantern's like, well, I could take you in a bubble, in a green bubble. He's like, I don't want to ride a bubble. It's like, well, what else could I make to carry you in? And he makes him a little sailboat, and it turns into a
You've told me this story on the podcast, right?
I'll probably keep mentioning it because it's so good. I might as well link it in the episode description.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the pod. We've talked about this on air.
But I did make the specific note, very 2003.
Very 2003. Yeah, but it just, again though, and we've talked about this, and I think we're going to have to keep talking about this. I have complicated feelings about retroactively applying current standards to older texts because stuff is inherently rooted in the time it was made and people's opinions were different. But I don't think that means we shouldn't hold people accountable for things that they said.
Yeah.
But also, do I want to, would I prefer for Image to edit any future printings or any online digital versions of this comic to take that out? Well, no, because this is what was on the page when it was written, and that's important.
Yeah, to hide it would to act like it never happened, which I think is more insulting than
exactly. And so I think it's powerful for this stuff to exist in whatever form it exists in, but it doesn't make it any less sort of annoying to read.
So this isn't an excuse or anything, but it does feel very noteworthy for what we're talking about in this comic. And I'm recalling information from when I read it however many years ago.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain that the character William, his friend, does turn out to be gay.
Oh, okay.
And I think as well, the reveal of it, he's definitely in the closet at this point. I think the reveal of it is like intentionally underplayed. Like he just kind of and Mark's like, oh, you're gay. Okay, then. Like, and then it's just moved on. So I'm recalling that. I might be wrong, but I'm almost certain that is what they do in the comic. They have the character William is just gay from the start in the TV show.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And again, that is the modernization of it, so they kind of had to.
So when did the TV... Because we're coming up to season 2. When did they start the TV show?
It was either last year or the year before. Like
so it's really recent.
Yeah, I think it got kind of delayed with the pandemic. Like, I think the first... Because the animation is the bit that takes the longest.
Yeah.
I think the animation, they did it pre-pandemic, and then when the pandemic hit, it was like, this is going to delay season 2, even though season 1 hadn't even come out yet. But they're like, this is going to delay season 2 because we can't get people to start animating it yet.
The production cycles on that stuff are wild, aren't they?
And when you look, like, you saw the animation...
It's well animated.
Yeah, you saw the animation style in that clip, and...
Very reminiscent of early 2000s DC and Marvel cartoons.
Yes, exactly.
Really reminiscent of that stuff.
But even more detailed and crisper. Like, again, we were saying with the actual comic book, cartoon animation has come a long way since then as well. One thing we definitely have...
I mean, digital technology's changed the way that stuff is animated massively.
One thing we definitely have to watch at some point, I want to get your view on this, like, it's considered the greatest animation ever, an anime called Akira. Have you seen it?
I've seen bits of Akira, yeah.
The animation is, like, blows you away. For how long ago it was made, it's amazing. And also, the people realize we can't keep doing this because it's so difficult to make.
Yeah, I mean, Akira was hand-drawn, wasn't it?
Yes, but to such detail, to painstaking detail. I think it's fair to say the only reason it was possible to make to the level that it was because of the toxic workplace culture in Japan. Like, people were living in the studio.
You don't leave until your boss leaves, and if he wants to go for a drink, you follow him and you pour his fucking drink for him. Like, it's real grim over there, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's why you don't get the level of Akira animes anymore. Yeah.
Which is interesting because Japanese animation is generally regarded to be less detailed than Western animation. They have a lower frame rate. So they animate to a lower frame rate in Japan in general. And so it's so interesting that what's held up to be the pinnacle is from that environment where the animation, I mean, obviously Japanese animation is very special and it's really cool. But they tend to animate to a lower frame rate, and that just physically means there are less drawings per second. Do you know what I mean? Speaking
of animation, I saw another video by Matt with 4Ts. He did another...
Is this just plagiarism at this point?
I mean, go watch the video. Like, it's a really in-depth one of how Junji Ito's work is so terrifying. Like, how it works. And I won't go into it because it's like 6 points and they're all really interesting. Yeah. But one point from it, which I think you'll appreciate, is noticing... And I didn't notice this until he pointed out in the video. So again, worth watching for the examples alone. He pointed out that in animes, the protagonists are normally simpler drawn. So, like, very simple, like eyes, nose, mouth.
Yeah.
Everyone else is far more detailed. And the reason is because the simpler a character looks, the easier it is to subconsciously put yourself in the shoes of the character. And that's why the antagonists are more detailed looking, because then they are everything else in the world.
Yeah.
And I literally never noticed that. And as soon as he pointed out, I thought of every anime I've ever seen. I thought, yeah, that's 100% true. The only one I think that doesn't apply to is like Pokemon, where all the characters are that simple style, because they're all like pretty good characters.
Yes, although in the video game, they made the protagonist silent.
And that's the same thing. It works in the same way.
Express desire of making it so that you would really identify with him.
The nameless, faceless characters you are your surrogate in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I'm thinking Naruto, I'm thinking One Piece.
Dragon Ball's a good one for that, because Goku has a pretty simple face and everyone else is extra detailed.
Particularly Kid Goku.
And even
particularly Kid Goku.
And it carries on into adult Goku as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, that's really interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like even Luffy in One Piece.
Exactly.
He has a much rounder, simpler face than the whole rest of the ensemble. If you could hear me grimace in that, it's because my cat jumped on me and dug her claws into my leg.
Standard podcast fare.
Yeah, absolutely normal stuff.
So I think that's as much as we can say about
the
2 first volumes of Invincible.
Highly recommend it. Really enjoyed it.
Mm.
Definitely would be interested to talk about more of it at some point. I know it's like a pretty long dead franchise now, isn't it? But
well,
the cartoon might give us an opportunity. You never know.
I mean, there's going to be more seasons, so we'll maybe if the series comes out weekly, which I think it does.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'll have to double check, but if it does come out weekly, maybe we'll do one for the finale. We'll do another 2 volumes for the finale and just like touch back on it again.
Yeah. So if anyone remembers the costume competition from Spooky Season, that's ongoing. So get your entries in. And then, yes, thank you so much for listening. If you want to see more of us, Ryan masterfully edits some of this into shorts on YouTube and TikTok. They're fun. Comic Literate, you'll find us there.
Sometimes the algorithm actually works in our favor.
Yeah, occasionally they show them to people. If you want to send us an email, comicliterate@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for listening and good night.
Thank you. Goodbye. I. 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 I.